Former Florida governor and possible Republican presidential candidate Jeb Bush spoke at the National Automobile Dealers Association convention in San Francisco. He offered a critique of the Obama administration and outlined some of his policy ideas for the economy, energy exploration, health care, immigration, and the nation's infrastructure. He says that he's considering a run for president in 2016. This is about an hour.
Thank you so much, Forrest. Thanks for that great introduction, and it is a joy to be here. Since I've been here, a lot of the members of NADA have asked me about how my family's doing, so I thought I'd give you a quick Bush family update. My mom and dad are doing well. My dad, as you know, is 90, and mom is 89. They just celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary, which I actually told my mom, this isn't actually true, but I told her that I have a bet with someone, a $10 bet, that they will be the longest married first couple in American history. And the problem is the Carters look quite healthy, and they're 2 years behind them. So trying to encourage mom and dad to continue to live well and live healthy. You may have seen that my dad, on his 90th birthday, jumped out of a helicopter, once again proving that it doesn't matter the age you are. If you have a joy for life and you live life to the fullest, that you can live a life of purpose and meaning. And with all due respect to all the people here that have wonderful dads, I have the greatest father in the world. I have to admit it. A lot of people ask about my brother. He's been kind of out of the limelight. And since you asked, Marvin is doing spectacularly well. George and Laura are doing well. He's become a painter. Who would have thunk it? He's actually really good at it because he's a person of incredible determination. Like many of you in this room, when he sets a goal, he works hard to achieve it. And I like the fact and I admire the fact that he has self-restraint, something that it would be hard for me to do. But he has, I think, been very respectful of his successor and hasn't been out, on the television sniping away, challenging President Obama. It might be tough for him to do that, I don't know, but I respect the fact as a former, he's allowed the president to serve, and it's a noble tradition that I hope continues in this country. And I love my brother, and I love his service to our country. My son George just got elected to a statewide office in Texas, the Texas Land Commissioner, which is a big job, and he got the highest percentage of anybody running for statewide office, and I'm very proud of him. And the other thing I'd say about the Bush family is my dream came true. I have 3 grandchildren and 1 on the way. All of them are spectacular. They're a lot better than managing children, that's for sure. They're the joys of my life. And every Sunday, Columba and I get to have Sunday Fun Day with 2 of our granddaughters. One of them is Georgia Helena Walker Bush, named after her great-granddad, and I secretly call her 41. So I have a blessed life, that's for sure. Hey, look, I understand I'm not the first Bush to speak to this group. Actually, I'm not the second, or even the third. And I'm really glad you didn't skip over me and invite George P. to come here speak today, so thank you for that. Other than grandkids, there is another thing that I'm actively involved in. I've set up a leadership PAC called the Right to Rise Leadership PAC, and I did this to play an active role in promoting ideas and supporting individuals who I believe are focused on restoring the promise of fair and free opportunity in America. You didn't come here for a political ad, and you're not going to get one, and your checkbook, by the way, is very safe here today as well. But I do want to speak about the urgency of this cause and why I'm willing to lend my voice and efforts. As I travel around, I've sensed that Americans are frustrated, and all the polling shows it as well. We're in the 5th year or almost 6th year of a recovery, and 60% of Americans believe that we're still in a recession. They're not dumb. It's because they are in a recession. They're frustrated. They see a small portion of the population on the economy's escalator, Portfolios are strong, but paychecks are weak. Millions of Americans want to move forward in their life. They want to rise, but they're losing hope and withdrawing from the task of building families. Family formation rate is at an all-time low, building careers, and building communities. Far from spreading opportunity, our government now gets in the way each and every day. Another law, another tax, another fee, or another regulation. It all stands in the way of a new business, a new invention, a new job, and most importantly, rising income for American families. The great stories that were told here today of successful dealerships, it's harder today to do exactly what you all have done to achieve earned success. We've created a complicated society on top of people's aspirations, and today in America, fewer and fewer people are rising up. And I know you know what I mean because your industry has to deal with this. Your research shows that regulations at dealers add $3.2 billion in cost, which are passed on to buyers. This is an average, as I understand it, of $2,400 per dealership employee per year, and those costs to comply, those costs of regulation could have gone for higher pay to allow people more disposable income, or they could have gone to create more jobs. Another great example, sadly, of this is the CFPB rules on dealer financing. They went forward with the rule without notice, without a public hearing, not knowing whether it would work. The worst part of this is that unelected bureaucrats have more power than Congress in this particular case, who are trying to repeal the rules. And I hope that you continue to stay involved. Everyday Americans don't see leadership or adult conversations about the nation's problems and the missed opportunities that we have, and they're growing frustrated. We should be promoting policies which help America move up the income ladder based on merit, hard work, and earned success. Those policies should tear down the ceilings above people's aspirations. It is time to challenge every aspect of how government works, how it taxes, how it regulates, how it spends, to open up economic opportunity for all. To achieve earned success, Americans also have to have the skills to do so. This means fixing our tired education system and bringing job training into the 21st century. In spite of the fact that we're in the 5th year of a recovery and during the deepest downturn since the Great Depression, throughout this entire time, there have been around 3 million jobs unfilled because of the skills gap that exists in this country. We need to restore America's leadership in the world by restoring what an effective president must have: the trust of our friends and the fear of our enemies. Most of all, I want to affirm that whoever leads must do so with faith in America's future, with a recognition that every citizen is a gift that can make a contribution, and that our best days are ahead. I truly believe that this incredibly great country is on the precipice of the greatest time to be alive in America, but we need to begin to fix a few big, complicated things to allow all people to rise up. Our nation's economy used to grow at 3.5% to 4%. That was the norm throughout all but the last 15 years. Over that time, the kind of growth made it possible for median family incomes to grow each and every year. We had a stable and growing middle class. Standards of living were rising for all Americans. Opportunities for new businesses and new industries to rise up was the norm. Now, in spite of the last few months, which have been good economic news, the new normal, if you talk to the smart people that decide these things, the new normal is 1.5% to 2% growth. And the challenge with that is, if we're to grow at that rate, kind of the European economic model, we're not going to be able to build the kind of capacity for people to pursue their dreams as they see fit. People's dreams will be limited, and the demands on government will continue to grow. To put it in perspective, if we were to grow at 2% more per year on top of what the new expectations are, compounded out for 10 years, we would create a Germany of additional economic activity in the 10th year. No amount of exotic forms of taxation, proposed by our president or the progressives in this country, comes close to the kind of revenue that government would get if we were to grow at 3.5% or 4% a year, if we created in that 10th year an additional Germany. So how do we create an additional Germany? We need to reform our healthcare system to improve quality and lower costs. Obamacare is clearly a job killer. We need to invest in the long-term things. We need to invest in the long-term things like infrastructure and research and development to spur the next generations of technologies and innovations to allow the United States to continue to grow at a faster rate than we're growing now. Ultimately, that requires reforming our entitlement system and having the courage to do so rather than to kick the can down the road, making it harder and harder for the next generation to do anything because these costs will overwhelm our country. All of these things and other things that are important to do to improve the business climate will require a climate of consensus and compromise that is non-existent in Washington, D.C. right now. In addition to those, I have 3 suggestions. I'm trying to find a venue that, since this is not a partisan political crowd, I'm trying to figure out things that I could talk about here that aren't necessarily political, but could help us sustain economic growth over the long haul. First, we need a patriotic energy policy based on North American resources and American ingenuity and innovation. Second, we need an economically driven. Secondly, we need to fix our broken immigration system and convert it to an economically driven one that would create opportunities for all Americans. And finally, we need a stem-to-stern transformation of our education system because as I look over the horizon, I see great social strains if we don't get education right. On energy, we're the most energy-abundant country in the world. We have more BTUs of coal than Saudi Arabia has units of energy of oil. We have over 100 years of supply of natural gas, billions of barrels of reserves of oil, and we're the source of innovation for conservation and renewables. Yet last year, $300 billion left our country to countries that either are unstable and could hate us if there was regime change or already do hate us. $300 billion without economic activity for us, empowering countries that make our foreign policy more difficult to attain. The great news is, and it's spectacular news, is that the United States is fast becoming the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. And we can be energy secure with North American resources and American innovation. The most transformative innovation over the last generation of time, beyond the commercialization of the internet, has been the combination of 2 existing technologies that have been around a long, long while, but applied together. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking has created a veritable revolution, and those that serve communities where the oil revolution is taking place, you know exactly what I mean. Billions and billions of dollars invested in our own country. Jobs significantly higher than the median of every community being created each and every day. The problem, I guess, is that this isn't cool on the coast. It's not cool here in San Francisco to talk about this. I don't know, if you walked outside, you might get a protester to talk about this incredible thing that we should be celebrating. Or on the East Coast, the same thing. It's cool in places like North Dakota and West Texas and South Texas. It's cool because it creates significant economic activity. And notwithstanding the lack of coolness, this revolution allows us to reindustrialize our country, to create high-wage jobs again for us to lead the world. It will lessen our greenhouse gas emissions as more power is generated by natural gas. It is saving consumers billions of dollars on utility bills and billions of dollars now of additional dollars at the gas pump, and I imagine it's probably stimulating car sales a little bit too. The revolution is creating hundreds of thousands of high-wage jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars in investment in our country. This lessens our balance of payment deficit, and it diminishes the need to have a heavy footprint around the world where our foreign policy can be a force for good. Our foreign policy, and I believe completely that we should be engaged, should be about the strategic interests of this country, not the fact that we're not secure with energy. What should we do? Well, the first thing we should do is approve the XL pipeline, for crying out loud. That is a no-brainer. Washington shouldn't try to regulate hydraulic fracking out of business. It should be done reasonably and thoughtfully to protect the natural environment, but it shouldn't be done with the intent of paralyzing it. We should open up federal lands and federal waters to accelerate energy security. We should help Mexico with the modernization of their oil sector. Our objective should be energy security with Canada, the United States, and Mexico to allow us to grow and prosper. We should accelerate the building out the interstate infrastructure system that would allow the use of natural gas for trucking. We should continue to consume less in our homes and in our cars and in our businesses. The cheapest energy we get is the energy we don't use. And finally, we should let market forces decide where to invest. We shouldn't resort to government-sponsored venture capital. That's an oxymoron. It's a complete disaster. A real energy strategy would get us 1% of additional growth over the long haul, creating tremendous prosperity and higher income for middle-class families in this country. But the second big opportunity for our country is to recognize our immigration system is broken, and we need to fix it and shift it to an economic driver. Demography is destiny, and the aging population with fewer workers means lower growth and a growing burden on young workers. The slow-growing developing countries for the last few decades have really struggled with lower fertility rates. Japan has a declining population now. Europe, Russia, and now China is starting to feel the impact of its one-child policy. While we're better off, our fertility rate has dropped dramatically in the last few years and now, for the first time, stands below break-even. Family formation rates are at an all-time low in this country, and we have this big demographic challenge of people more or less my age getting older each and every day, and so our demographic pyramid is like this, and we're not fixing our entitlement problems. This will choke off long-term economic growth. But unlike other parts of the country where other parts of the world where immigration is a serious problem, we have a history of allowing people to come in legally, to embrace our values, and pursue their dreams in a way that creates prosperity for all of us. No country can do this like America. Our national identity is not based on race or some kind of exclusionary belief. Historically, the unwritten contract has been, come legally to our country, embrace our values, learn English, work, and you can be as American as anyone else. Immigrants are an engine of economic vitality. According to Inc. magazine, immigrants start 2 times as many businesses as native-born Americans. Legal immigrants have higher family formation rates. They also have higher first-time homeowners rates. And my guess is in many of the communities where there are large legal immigrant communities across this country, you know full well that they also buy a lot of cars. It's not just STEM-related activities where immigrants can play a role in the United States. There are many jobs unfilled which could be filled by legal immigrants, creating economic growth for all of us. So here's what we need to do. First and foremost, we need to control our border. A great nation needs to control its border, not just at the border, which is hugely important, but also the 40% of the people that have come here illegally came with a legal visa and overstayed their bounds. We ought to be able to figure out where they are and politely ask them to leave. We need to use state and local enforcement. State and local law enforcement should be a partner with our federal government to make this done effectively and in a compassionate way. And we need to use E-Verify as the means by which to assure that businesses don't hire illegal immigrants. Secondly, we need to move from a family reunification model to an economic growth-driven system, which means that we move back to what every other country in the world has. Spouse and minor children as the petitioning part of family, and not have adult siblings and adult parents, we're the only country that has. And we've had it for 40 years. And as we've done this, we've created chain migration, which crowds out economic immigrants in ways that people don't really realize. If we narrow this and dramatically expanded the economic type immigrants across the spectrum of our economy, we could create significant economic activity for this country. It would be like we were the Tennessee Titans. I think they have the first-round draft pick this year, I believe. It would be like us being the owner of the Tennessee Titans, and we would get the first 400,000 first-round draft picks. but we would get to do it each and every year. We would get the dreamers, the investors, the STEM-related talent. We would get the hardworking people that sign this unwritten contract to be able to pursue their dreams in this country, and it would be a catalytic converter of high sustained economic growth for our country. And finally, we need to find a way, a path to legalized status for those that have come here and have languished in the shadows. There's no way that they're going to be deported. No one's suggesting an organized effort to do that. The cost of that would be extraordinary. We need to find a way where they pay fines, they learn English, they work, and they get in the back of the line, but they come out of the shadows so that they can have the full productivity to be partners in this strategy of high economic growth. The final thing I would say, if we're going to be successful as a nation, and I truly believe this, then we need to embrace the set of shared values that have made us unique and exceptional. Today in America, I have doubts that Americans all believe in a set of shared values. If we're to be successful integrating immigrants, we have to believe in those shared values as well and ask immigrants to do the same, which I believe means that in places like Arizona, which they just mandated civics education, all across this country, we need to restore a sense of our heritage, our history, why it is so special to be an American, believe it ourselves, and then ask the newly arrived to do the exact same thing. Nothing would stop America if we did that. I'm not an economist, but I believe if we got those two things right, this country, the pessimism that would exist and the fear of the unknown in the future would begin to subside immediately, and people would begin to take more risks on behalf of themselves and their families, and business startup rates would begin to grow. But there's one thing that we need to do to sustain this over the long haul, and that is to assure that when a child is born in this country, that they have the God-given ability to learn, that they have a chance to do so. Too many young people today are functionally illiterate or have no sense of how to calculate math, no sense of our history, and they're left behind. With innovation exploding into our lives and automation exploding into our lives, we are seeing now increasing numbers of people that don't have the skills to even get their first job. And we spend more per student than any country in the world other than a couple of smaller countries. It seems to me with an 80% graduation rate, which is what we have for high school, and yet 1/4 of all the kids taking the 4 elements of the ACT test, only 1 in 4 pass all 4 elements of the test. The remedial rate for community colleges from kids entering from high school directly to community colleges is over 50%. Universities now struggle with children, young students that don't have the skills to be able to start taking college-level work. This is a huge challenge. And yet there's no one marching in the streets for those that are left behind. And I think this needs to be not a federal program by any stretch of the imagination, but this should be a national calling. A great country like America needs to make sure that people have the skills and the drive and the determination to rise up. When that doesn't happen, people begin to feel disaffected and don't believe the system works for them. So what should we do? We need to transform a system that is organized in a strange way in my mind for 2014. 13,174 government-run monopolies, in effect, highly politicized and unionized, focused on the economic interests of the adults. That's fine, but it's not customized to the unique needs of every child. And we need to change it. In Florida, we started on this journey. You may see the tire marks on my forehead for challenging the status quo in this regard. We did some really crazy things like grade schools A, B, C, D, and F. 100% based on student learning, both learning gains and how students did to our standards. And the net result was that every kid mattered in these schools because there were rewards for A's and rewards for improvements. And there was a different consequence between abject failure and mediocrity. We started seeing rising student achievement because kids that just languished behind they became important in this grading system. We eliminated social promotion in 3rd grade, this insidious idea that self-esteem is more important than learning how to read. That's what we have in America today, and the tragedy of that is heartbreaking. Think of it. If you can't read going into 4th grade, you're not going to be able to acquire knowledge. But yet we've done this generation after generation. and too many young people, then the gaps begin to grow and they drop out. In Florida, we eliminated that insidious policy and replaced it with a policy of strategic imperative to make sure that children learn. We cut in half the functional literacy rate. In fact, Florida fourth grade readers on the NAEP test, which is the nation's report card because of these harder edge strategies, went from 29th out of 31 in 1997 to 6th out of 50 10 years later. And Florida's low-income kids, Hispanic kids, do better than the California average. So don't tell me, because too many people say it's not possible, that kids in poverty can't learn, or kids of color can't learn. If you hear someone tell you that, challenge them and say, God has given these kids the ability to learn. It's up to us, in all honesty, to organize ourselves in our communities to make sure that they do. And if we get that right across the board, nothing would stop the United States of America. I'll conclude with this. We're starving for leadership in the public realm. Each and every one of you are leaders in your families, in your business, in your community. Without leadership, you wouldn't be as successful as you've been. But for some odd reason, there's a dearth of leadership in the public square today. It's important to have leaders because now people believe that the dysfunction is permanent in Washington, D.C. We've been a republic, I believe, for 239 years. We've had a few years of dysfunction, but most of the time it's worked pretty well. In times far worse than this, the Civil War, the Vietnam War, the cultural wars of the 60s, World War I, World War II, this is not the worst time to be alive as an American, but yet this dysfunction seems to be permanent. I just reject it out of hand. Public leadership can change this. Effective leaders come in many forms and from both political parties. President Kennedy led through vision and inspiration when he challenged America to land a man on the moon. He led. Lyndon Johnson used forceful, hands-on leadership that produced the most historic civil rights legislation in our country's history and a 25% across-the-board income tax cut in just 6 weeks after the tragic assassination of President Kennedy. He cajoled, he hugged, he begged, I bet he threatened, he praised, he did whatever it took to get the job done. Johnson, in that moment of time, led. Or what about Ronald Reagan? Senator Ted Kennedy called Ronald Reagan a good friend and a gracious foe. He wanted to defeat his opponents, but not destroy them. President Reagan came into office with a focus on two evil empires in his sights. One was the Soviet Union, and the other was a federal government intruding ever more in the lives of its citizens. He brought down the former and reined in the latter by doing something that today would be considered unthinkable. He embraced his adversaries. Imagine that. He actually had a relationship with the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, and that relationship created the possibilities of saving Social Security for a lifetime. The most meaningful tax reductions occurred because Democrats and Republicans forged consensus and put aside the pettiness of the fight and focused on the broader long-term interests. And that lesson, I think, is hugely important. Two people can disagree, and they can disagree vehemently. But if they see in each other an honest broker, motivated by good intentions and sincere beliefs, they can find accommodation. President Reagan led. Or how about my dad managing the fall of the Iron Curtain? As the Soviet Empire was collapsing, there were significant dangers that it would become violent, and in fact, violence of epic proportions. The United States could have justifiably done a victory dance as the Berlin Wall fell. In fact, many people in the press and others, critics of my dad, were critical of him not going over to Berlin to dance on the wall with young Berliners. But instinctively, my dad knew that it would be the wrong thing to do. The collapse of the Soviet Union miraculously occurred with little bloodshed. A significant reason was that George H.W. Bush didn't do a victory dance. He humbly helped Gorbachev when all hope was lost. He steadfastly supported Kohl when no one else in Europe showed the same kind of commitment. And the reunification of Germany took place in spite of that because my dad led. We need that kind of leadership in Washington, D.C. today. Leaders set goals and build support beyond their comfort zones. Leaders have the humility to share in the credit and accept responsibility when things don't work out. Too many people in Washington blame the dog eating their homework over and over and over again. It's time for people to accept responsibility because guess what? We're imperfect. We make mistakes. To create a culture of leadership where you begin to forge solutions, you have to accept responsibility for the errors that you do make. Leaders show dogged determination and don't stop if there's a setback. Leaders force others to show the skills of leadership as well. Leaders build on their success. When they succeed, they don't rub it in the faces of their political critics. They look for the next way to build consensus for the next challenge. My passionate belief, as I've said, is that we're on the verge of the greatest time to be alive in this country. The amount of science that is exploding into our lives will allow us to live lives far longer than what anybody could have imagined. The whole advancement of technology allows us to live lives that people just a decade ago couldn't have imagined. We have the capability, we're a big country, we have the capability of solving these problems. They're big, complex problems, but with leadership, we'll solve these things. And when we do, this will be the greatest time to be alive as an American. And I hope you join in that effort to transform our country so that our children and grandchildren will have the same opportunities that we had. God bless you all, and thank you for allowing me to come.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I was a little nervous. This is not the kind of crowd I'm used to. It's a little bit bigger.
It's a lot of people, more people I think than we expected. So, Governor, you formed an exploratory committee. The media's here. There's over 4,000 people out there. Let's just get the toughest question right out of the way right now. What's your favorite car?
I just bought a Ford Fusion. Yeah, this isn't just for the record. This is what you call a no-win situation. I mean, but I'm excited. I love the car, and it's working really well. I don't travel. First of all, the record, I do drive. Just to let everybody know, been driving pretty well. Haven't had any tickets or anything. But I travel so much, I don't get to use it as much. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to the dealership so that I can get my 2-hour course on the technology.
Yeah.
It should be easier.
It should. I would recommend you not get a speeding ticket, by the way. Governor, there's 17,000 franchise dealers out in this country, and they have 1 million employees. They would love to hear you make a big announcement on where you're going to be on January 17th, 2017.
So I hope to be buying another car for my wife. Any suggestions? My email address is jeb@jeb.org. What day is that, by the way? I'm just missing.
I think that's inauguration day. I thought maybe you would know.
Just for the record, I haven't set up an exploratory committee. I'm seriously considering the possibility of running, which is the legal terminology I will stick with. I've created a leadership pack, but so until I get to the next step of this, January 17th is just another day for me.
Okay. So, Governor, I understand that you and Mitt had a very secret meeting last week.
Not so secret.
They can't hear you. Just between the two of us, can you tell me what you guys talked about?
Yeah. So it was yesterday, and I went to visit Governor Romney. I have enormous respect for him. The meeting was set up 3 months ago under slightly different circumstances, I guess, and I was happy to be able to continue to have the meeting. We talked about the Patriots. We talked a little bit about politics, not as much as you might imagine. We talked about the future of the country. talked about a need for a more engaged foreign policy where the United States accepts world power status because it brings peace and stability in the world. And when we pull back and consider ourselves to be a problem in the world, it creates real problems for us and the American people and the rest of the world. So we talked a lot about foreign policy. We share a very similar view about that. I'm actually more interested in policy, so we talked about that, and he shared his views. It was a good conversation. I respect him a lot, and I consider him a friend. The awkward side of this about running and stuff, we put aside. So that's a decision he'll make, and I'll have my path for a decision, and who knows where that will lead.
What's your own vision?
Can I tell the rest of the story? Because the funny part I told you,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. You think I'm going to stop you?
So it was leaked to the New York Times, and then I'm at the airport going to Salt Lake City, and there were literally 3 reporters there watching me get on, just coincidentally. I think two were going to the Detroit Auto Show. Is that into this week?
Yes.
And another was there for another reason. So just coincidentally, I ran into a reporter for ABC, CBS, and the Wall Street Journal, as luck would have it. So when I got to Salt Lake City, there were lots of cameras. There was a guy that was broadcasting live on a radio station, and we were having this weird conversation where I'm walking, trying to find the car that's going to take me to the governor's house. And all of a sudden, I get overwhelmed by people asking for me signing baseballs and pieces of paper. And it turns out this is the first day of the Sundance Film Festival, and all of these autograph hounds were there waiting for movie stars to show up. As luck would have it, I mean, literally swamped by 50 people. So it became kind of like a Fellini movie, but I got through it and had a nice conversation with Mitt.
That's great. What's your own vision for our country?
I believe, as I said, that we're on the verge of restoring American greatness, and it will require not just talking about it and not fighting about it, not reacting to the overreach of this administration, but trying to forge consensus on how we could create a more optimistic country by creating higher sustained economic growth. And then focus on the fact that you can have growth right now, we're growing pretty good, but there are a lot of people being left behind. If you're born poor in America today, you're more likely to stay poor than any time in modern history. And if you're born wealthy, you're more likely to stay there. There's stickiness at the end, if you will, and the middle's getting squeezed. So bigger policies to deal with this issue of the lack of people moving up and the fact that people in the middle are disaffected and they don't see the system working for them is what we need to fix. And you can do that by tax reform, entitlement reform, regulatory reform, taking advantage of the strengths of the country. Those are problems that we need to fix, and taking advantage of the unique nature of our country in terms of our scale, in terms of our geography. We're a big country. In terms of our immigrant heritage, in terms of the vast resources we have in this country. All of those things executed on properly would allow us to grow at a faster rate. And that should be the challenge, plus having a president that recognizes that there had been a bipartisan consensus about the role of America in the world. Right now, we don't have that consensus. This president, I believe, with all due respect, doesn't see the United States being a world power being a good thing. He thinks it's bad. He thinks it hurts our country and hurts other countries. And with all due respect, and I am very respectful because I did have a dad and a brother that served in that office, and I saw how they got torn apart, he's wrong on that.
All right, well, so on that, let me turn to foreign policy. What are the implications of the Paris attack and ISIS for the U.S.?
Well, the immediate implication was that the president missed a huge opportunity to show solidarity with our oldest ally. And not going or not having Vice President Biden or Secretary of State Kerry or Mrs. Obama going, I think was, I'm not quite sure why they didn't. It would have been a big win politically, but more importantly, it would have shown solidarity to encourage Europe to change some of their policies and to continue to work with us to protect our homeland and theirs as well. This has to be a cooperative effort, and I think it was a huge missed opportunity. The idea that people, this is an issue of leadership that you'll appreciate. I loved your speech, by the way.
Thank you.
It was great. an example of leadership is when it's not popular to do something. You know, if you read a poll and the polling information is underwater. And in the case of foreign policy, Americans are fatigued. We've had 2 wars, and they're fatigued. The president has reflected that sentiment to a certain extent, or acted on his policies believing that it wouldn't create any political problems for him. Well, when you start beheading Americans in far-off lands because a void was created because we pulled back, guess what? People's attitudes change about that pretty darn quick. And so you can't run foreign policy as a leader by following the polls. You have to persuade the American people, even if it is tough for them because of the economic situation, that we have to be engaged in the world. That doesn't mean we have to have boots on the ground in every instance, but our presence in the world is hugely important. Our friends need to know that we have their back, and our enemies need to know that if they cross a certain line, that the United States will engage in partnership with their friends, and that's not happening right now. So ISIS is a creation of that pulling back. ISIS was called 6 months ago a junior varsity team, which is just ridiculous. They have solidified their position in vast swaths of land in Syria and Iraq. Our efforts to create a coalition are non-existent, even though there's a lot of talk about it. The president called the Syrian moderate forces, that it was Pollyannish, I believe he said, or something like that, to engage with them. He had a chance to do it 2 years ago. The likelihood of ISIS forming as fast as it did wouldn't have happened had we engaged then. And so each and every time he's had a chance to engage to protect American interests, he's pulled back, and now we have a huge problem. And so the implications of France should be for us that it could happen here, and that we have to keep our guard up. We can't just keep pulling back. And the president needs to lead in this regard and explain to people how important it is to protect the homeland and the kind of tools that we need to be able to make that happen.
Thank you. So much of our economy is deeply intertwined with the tax system.
Yep.
A lot of dealers are interested in this room in streamlining things. What would you change about our tax system?
Well, first, if you could lower taxes as low as they could go and eliminate as many deductions as you could, similar to the '86 law, which is what happened, required bipartisan support, it would unleash capital investment in this country that would create high-wage jobs. There are 2 reasons why that's the case. One, it limits power of government to have a simpler tax code. If you have to hire compliance officers and lawyers and accountants to be able to comply with the law, or you get in line to, get your left-handed Albanian tax credit or whatever, instead of saying, here's my dream, I'm going to invest in my dream, and I know that I will pay in a transparent kind of system X amount in taxes, it's a far better system. I was told by the CFO of CVS and a friend of mine, that CVS, the drugstore company, pays 1% of all corporate taxes. They have an effective rate in the 30s because they don't depreciate. They basically, they rent their places, and they're all U.S. based. There are companies, big corporations in this country, that pay no taxes and do it consistently. It seems to me that simplifying the code and bringing equity into the equation would be hugely important. And then most of the heartbeat of our country's growth is not in the corporate world, it's in the LLC world, the pass-through world. I don't know if your businesses are set up as...
a lot of them.
I mean, Jeb Bush and Associates, a conglomerate of 4 people, is not necessarily the heartbeat of anything, but we went from 3 to 4 last year before I left. 25% increase. There are 1 million companies that if they did that, you'd have a lot of jobs, and that's all pass-through. So ultimately getting to the personal income tax rate, which has gone up extraordinarily high, and not just focus on the high end, focus also on the middle class. But I think it's got to be broad and less power to government by eliminating as many loopholes as possible.
So I got another really tough one for you.
Yeah. I don't know, in Alabama you don't have the excuse me for living tax, do you?
Not that I'm aware of.
That's in California, I'm sorry. I mean, you think about this is not just, my point was, this is not just a federal issue. That's a big part of it. But states better be careful thinking that there is that you're going to constantly get income from higher and higher taxes. There's a point where people move. There's a point where people don't risk their capital. There's a point where people say, I'm just going to ride it out because there's no economic interest for me to make that investment and create those jobs with the level of regulation and taxes that exist. And so our federal system is really good in this regard because it does force, it's a check on the states that believe that you can pass an excuse me for living tax or tax the air you breathe tax because people will move.
Thanks. I have another really tough question for you. What do you like to do for fun?
Fun. I love Sundays. That's my fun day. It's Sunday fun day. I don't work on Sundays. I play golf really fast so that I can have breakfast really fast so I can go to Mass slower. I can't ask the priest to accelerate that. I probably would if I could. Please don't tell Father Davis. He would be very upset that I said that. But
mum's the word.
You know, and then our grandkids come and we cook out on the grill. We watch football and we talk about fun things. Sunday is my fun day, and I also like to read. I love to read.
Tell me, you brought up Mass. Tell me how faith has affected your life.
So I converted. My parents, we were brought up in the Episcopal Church, and it was, I enjoyed it a lot being with my family, going to church every Sunday, but my faith was strengthened when I converted to my wife's faith, and it's had an important part of my life. It gives me, I don't know how to describe this. Bushes aren't good about like spilling our guts, so on things that are private, this is not easy to do, but it gives me a serenity that in a world of a lot of turbulence is really important. It creates a moral architecture that simplifies things. I mean, there are views that I have that are grounded in faith that really aren't negotiable, and it just simplifies things, particularly in public life where you're always asked to modify this and modify that. I think people expect you to have thought it through, and if faith drives it, you express your views in a loving way, not in a harsh way or a judgmental way, but you stick to your guns because it's more important than politics, to be honest with you. So as governor during tough times, my faith was hugely important, and today it continues to be an important part of my life.
And thank you. I think no one can deny that Washington imposes a lot of restrictions on free enterprise. You spoke about it, but what do you think we could do now that's not being done?
Roll it back. I mean, look, a lot of the president's efforts are done by executive order because the government shut down about 6 years ago. I mean, if you think about it, after stimulus, the first budget, the Dodd-Frank and the Affordable Care Act, it's been, I mean, they're basically Maytag repairmen, I mean, there's nothing, basically nothing gets done. So the president is happy with that. The House last year or last session passed something like 350 bills out of the House, most with bipartisan support, that sat in Harry Reid's desk. And so the strategy was, don't let any Democrat vote, for God forbid they would actually have to have a vote because they would be held accountable. But then I will use my executive authority to make carbon a pollutant, pass, implement laws on immigration, create rules that go beyond his authority. I mean, there's scores of these things, and so I think the next president has a duty to roll back the things that where the president has gone beyond his constitutional authority, and in some cases roll back the things that where he does have the constitutional authority as well, which are done. The law allows him to do it, and he does it. The next president has every right to undo that in certain ways. And I think appointing men and women that have actually had practical business experience in the agencies that regulate business is kind of important, instead of having academics and political hacks run all this stuff with really hardcore ideologies. I think, you know, many of the rules that are implemented there's a process of impact statements for economic cost. You have to do a cost-benefit analysis, but no one takes that seriously. We need to really take that seriously, because there's a lot of well-intended rules that have minor benefits but massive costs. Rule after rule falls into that category. So going through a thoughtful process, intellectually honest, grounded in principle to be able to deal with that. I think we need to reform the Administrative Procedures Act, or whatever it's called in Washington. That's what it's called. It's the state level, to speed up the process, to be able to permit things and to grant permission to do things. I mean, do you honestly think that we could build the interstate highway system today in America?
Probably not a chance.
I don't think so, but we could if we were serious about it. I mean, there's no reason why a great country can't, in 2014, do big things. But right now, we've put so much rules, it's hard to build a bridge. It's hard to prepare for the Panamax, the big widening of the Panama Canal. It's hard to build infrastructure. The standing that people have that are, you know, is way too broad. The costs are way too high. The uncertainty is all too clear. And it stifles the investment that creates income increases for the middle class. That's one thing. You want the rest now.
How about this? What's a do-over you'd like to have in life?
Do-over. Oh man, I've said some really stupid things in my life. I said something when I ran for governor in 1994 that was taken out of context, but I should have been smart enough to have said it differently. It was in a debate, and someone asked, "What would you do? What are you going to do for me?" And I was young and pretty rambunctious, 1994, and I said, "Probably nothing." I said, but this was that was the wrong answer. What I said, probably nothing. What I think we need to do is create a society where everybody gets to start at the same starting line, and we should strive for equality of opportunity, not a guarantee of results. That's what I said, and I believe that today, but there's a better way of saying that, because, look, it's so easy to open up wounds, and you don't want to, you can have a provocative thought, but you don't have to say it in a way that hurts people or turns them off. In fact, that's the problem today, is that we don't work hard to use language. And frankly, the bigger the idea, the more provocative the idea, the more you have to use language, I think, that doesn't scare people or insult them. And so I've gotten better at that. And that's what happens when you get older and your life experience through trial and error. This is what happens. This is called wisdom, I hope.
So I have two sons.
Who's with me that's 61 here? You know, when you're 41, it's great, but there's some things that we did and said 20 years ago that we all regret, I'm sure.
So I have two sons. So I want to ask you about family.
Yeah.
Did you ever get in a fight with your brother, the one that happened to be president, and who won?
Yeah, I mean, look, if his podium was here, it would be that big blue one, and the sound system's great, but it would be White House Communications, and he'd have 1,000 people in the press traveling with him, and let's say this was in Orlando, not San Francisco. Maybe as a sitting governor, I would introduce him and make some wisecrack, and he always got the last word, and he just always used it. So I've gotten my revenge in his post-presidency, but during his time as president, I learned very quickly, don't diss him, because he's got the bigger microphone.
What's the most important message that Republicans can bring?
Hope. I mean, an optimistic message, I think, grounded in the greatness of the potential of our country to be great over the long haul for our children and grandchildren. But it has to be grounded in an optimistic message, not a reactionary message. There are a lot of things to be really grumpy about. I mean, things aren't going well. Washington's not working. The Affordable Care Act is just this monstrosity. Dodd-Frank has got all sorts of unintended consequences that even, auto dealers have to deal with. There's a lot of reasons to be angry or grumpy and negative and then react to the overreach each and every time it comes our way. We're not going to win votes as Republicans unless we can lay out a hopeful, optimistic message that's based in reality, that's grounded in a set of policies that are real, that people believe could actually happen. Hope and a positive agenda wins out over anger and reaction every day of the week. And the message should be about what the future looks like, not some nostalgic view back. Does that make sense?
Sure. Governor, what's something that most people don't know about you? Well, it's just between just a few people here.
Unfortunately, not much. I don't know. I can't say that I'm a great singer or dancer. That would surprise people. It's not true, though, so I can't say that. You know, I'm an introvert.
Really?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that today.
Well, because I've overcome it. Introverts, who's an introvert in the crowd? Anybody? You guys, most of you are salesmen, so by your nature, you're extroverts, right? So introverts, actually, they're grinders. They identify a problem, by and large, and then they overcome it. They're good to have around in that regard. And I would rather read a book than go out and get in a conga line, you know, and go dancing. But I learned that in order to make your case, or in order to serve, or in order to advance a cause, you have to connect with people. And you can't connect with people if you're back in the corner, you know, reading a book. You have to engage with people, look them in the eye, connect with them on a human level, understand where they're coming from before you get a chance to lay out your plan, right?
Well, from what I can tell, you connected with this crowd.
Well, it was a blast to be with you. It was good to be with you.
So let's go back to maybe running for president. I feel...
Haven't we beaten this?
No, we have not yet.
Drum to the...
We may get there. But, so I think I figured out exactly. I know you're on the fence.
No, I'm not.
Oh.
I'm seriously considering the possibility of running.
Okay. Okay. Well, I've got you something I think will make your decision.
Uh-oh.
I think I've got something. It's right here.
Can you see it?
I think they're going to put it up.
There it is. There we go. He's bad. The problem with this is that the vice president's a better speaker.
I know.
Can't upstage the candidate.
I want to tell you, it's been an honor, and I know it has for everyone here. I really appreciate your time in coming, and let's give a round of applause for Governor Jeb Bush.